where gun culture meets the gospel. Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio.
Welcome to Armed Lutheran Radio. I'm your host, Lloyd Bailey, the Armed Lutheran, and this is episode 33, brought to you by Cook's Holsters, American-made custom Kydex holsters with a lifetime warranty and a 100% satisfaction guarantee, cooksholsters.com. Well, as Kathy said in the intro, here at Armed Lutheran Radio, we discuss faith, firearms, and freedom. We talk about guns, the natural right of self-defense, the shooting sports, hunting, and the ethical issues surrounding gun ownership and gun rights in light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Well, welcome to the show, and thank you all for listening, downloading, and subscribing. How was your week? Well, did you do anything fun with guns? Did you attend a training class or go hunting, maybe target shooting? Did you shoot a match of some kind, maybe? IDPA or USPSA? 3-gun? Take a new shooter to the range? Do a little dry fire? Drop by the feedback page at armedlutheran.us/feedback or click on the feedback button at the top of the website. Leave us a voice message or send us an email and tell us about what you've been doing with guns. We'd love to hear about it. And speaking of email, here's a listener email I wanted to read. Greetings. Wish your podcast had been around and that I found it 2 to 4 years ago. Well, it's only been around since January of this year. Never mind, he says. You were mentioned on the Polite Society podcast. I want to thank the guys at the Polite Society podcast for mentioning me. Just in passing, in relation to the Self-Defense Network, I was more pleased when I saw you're an LCMS member and you said Confessional Lutheran. Bravo. Anyway, we are moving up to Michigan soon as my wife finishes her deaconess training and employment begins up there. I'm starting with episode 1. Hopefully I will stick with you and to your current podcasts. I will definitely share your podcast with friends and pastors. Peace, Chantry Rice. Well, Chantry, thank you for your email. Thank you for listening to the show. I hope you do stick with it. You might want to start from this episode and work your way back, though. The first 2 or 3 episodes were a little rough around the edges, but we're getting better every week. At least I think so. I hope you do too. Thank you for your message. Blessings to you and your wife on your move. Hope everything goes well. Speaking of training, if you are interested in taking a training class, there's a good one coming up. Armed Lutheran Radio and Mission 160 Tactical are hosting a 1-day Fundamentals of Defensive Focus Shooting class. It'll be held in Whitewright, Texas on Saturday, October 22nd. Tuition is $200. For more information, check out the link in the show notes or visit fundamentaldefense.com. And if you use the promo code Lutheran, you'll save 20% off the tuition. It's a full day of training designed by Rob Pincus and taught by Armed Lutheran Radio contributor Aaron Israel, the owner of Fundamental Defense. Sergeant Bill and I will both be there. I hope you'll join us too. And I came across a cool podcast this week I wanted to share with you as well. It's a couple of veterans talk about all things badass. Knife making, I think, is the latest episode. They've talked about building ARs and bushcraft and foraging and prepping and how to make money off the grid, home security, all kinds of stuff. Chuck and Kevin at the Survival and Basic Badass podcast. It's available on iTunes, and I hope you will check it out. And I've got an announcement about this week's coming midweek meditation. As I was finalizing this episode, I was fortunate enough to line up an interview with Paul Lathrop, the founder and co-host of the Polite Society podcast. He has an amazing story that you need to hear if you carry a gun for self-defense. We often talk about, we think about the aftermath of an incident where you have to deploy your weapon in self-defense, all the things that happen after you actually use a gun. Well, imagine being falsely accused and going to jail because you stopped an aggressor simply by using your command voice to tell him that you've got a gun. That happened to Paul. And it's a harrowing story. It deserves its own show, quite frankly. So he's going to be joining me on this week's midweek meditation on Thursday. So please join us for that. Now, on to today's show. Mia Anstine follows up on Aaron Israel's self-defense tip from last week about sending your kids back to school, this time about arming your kids as they go off to college, not with guns, but with the gift of fear and intuition. Aaron Israel gets back to basics with a discussion of the AOJ triad: ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. And Sergeant Bill will teach us tips for shooting partial targets in IDPA. It's not like USPSA, and there's a trick to it, and Bill's going to share that in his Ballistic Minute today. And then we're geeking out a little bit. When Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healy thanked Chris Evans, the actor, for his support for her authoritarian gun control expansion by using the hashtag #StandWithCap, followed by an American flag, it was just another attempt by the left to usurp the imagery of American traditional values in service to big government and gun control. And it was a big disappointment for fans of the movies and of Captain America, like me. So, we're going to look at the parallels between the storyline in Captain America Civil War and the gun rights debate. They're pretty interesting. I did a little research and found some surprising parallels. And Brandon Warr of Warzone Media will join us to discuss it. All of that is straight ahead, right here on Armed Lutheran Radio.
If you like hunting or target shooting, or if you're a responsible firearms owner, you ought to know. Each year, the National Rifle Association invests millions of dollars to give firearms education and safety training to millions of Americans nationwide. Nobody does more to make Americans safe with firearms, and nobody does more to keep America's firearm freedom safe. For 130 years, we've worked to preserve freedom first. I'm Wayne LaPierre of the National Rifle Association.
It's time for this week's self-defense tip from Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense.
Hey folks, this is Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense here with your personal defense tip of the week. This week I want to go back to the basics and talk about when it would be reasonable for you as an armed citizen to use deadly force against an attacker. Now, in your licensing class, you probably talked about the black letter law in whatever state you live in. In the state of Texas, we're required to talk about use of deadly force from Chapter 9 in the Penal Code and what constitutes deadly force, what the legal definitions are, and what all of those terms mean. Now, a lot of instructors will simply read off of the PowerPoint slides without really getting into the philosophy or really giving you any kind of a thing that you can leave with as far as a litmus test for when is it okay for me to use deadly force. And I think that's unfortunate because knowing the black letter law is one thing, but being able to apply it to your daily life when and if you come into a situation where you might need to use deadly force is also very important, and I think it gets neglected a lot of the time. So the way I always start off my use of deadly force class is I talk about ability, opportunity, and jeopardy. Ability, opportunity, and jeopardy is a three-pronged test that gives you a basic litmus test for how you decide whether using deadly force is reasonable based on the type of attack that you're facing and whether that person really needs to be shot. So first off, ability. Ability has to do with can the person who is attacking me, who is put me in fear of death or serious bodily injury, can I articulate that they have the ability to kill or seriously injure me? Now, as an example, if my 100-pound wife attacks me with her bare hands and I shoot her in self-defense and I try to claim that, hey, I had to shoot her because I was in fear for my life, I'm going to have a hard time convincing the finders of fact, the police that show up on the scene, the prosecutor, if I ever go to trial, and a jury of my peers if I ever go to trial. I'm going to have a hard time convincing them that she had the ability to kill or seriously injure me with her bare hands. Now, that's notwithstanding any ninja skills that she might have that I don't know about, but if just looking at the facts of the case, when they show her versus me and her bare hands versus me with my gun, there's not going to be a very good way that I can explain that she had the ability to kill or seriously injure me, or that she gave me the apprehension that I needed to shoot her based on her physical stature and just attacking me with her bare hands. So she wouldn't have the ability. So first off, before I can use deadly force against someone, I have to be able to articulate the fact that they have the ability to kill or seriously injure me. The second thing is I have to be able to articulate that they had the opportunity to kill or seriously injure me. Now, if I look out my door right now to the end of my block and I see a guy walking around with a samurai sword, he certainly has the ability to kill or seriously injure me. He's walking around with a samurai sword. He could lop my arm off, he could chop my head off, whatever the case may be, he could kill or seriously injure me with that samurai sword. But if he's all the way over at the end of my street, a couple hundred yards away, if I just shoot him with my AR-15 from the front porch because he's carrying a samurai sword, I really can't articulate that he ever had the opportunity to kill or seriously injure me with that samurai sword. So just because he has the ability, he's walking around with the sword, and I see him doing that, wouldn't justify me in using deadly force because he has no opportunity to kill or seriously injure me in that moment. So I need to be able to articulate not only ability, but also opportunity. The third thing is jeopardy. Jeopardy means that I need to be able to articulate that whatever that person who's attacking me, who I decide to use deadly force against, is doing, gives me a reasonable fear for death or serious bodily injury based on what they're doing in that moment. So someone might have the ability and the opportunity. Let's use that same scenario, but instead of a samurai sword, let's put an AR-15 in the guy's hand. So I look out my door, and the guy's walking around with an AR-15 in his hands, just maybe at the ready, or maybe he's just got it slung on his back or something like that. So he's got the ability to kill or seriously injure me. That rifle gives him the ability to do so. Not only that, he's got the opportunity to kill or seriously injure me because if he wanted to, he could take aim and from 100 yards away, he could smoke me with that AR-15 rifle. But if he's not doing anything, if he's just walking around, open carry's legal. He's allowed to carry at the end of my block if he wants to and walk around with that rifle. If he hasn't pointed the rifle at me or shouted a threat or something to give me the apprehension that my life is in jeopardy at that moment, then I haven't met the third prong of the test. So he might have the ability and the opportunity, but if he's not doing anything that actually puts me in fear for my life, then I've got no reason to use deadly force against that person. So it's very important that you understand that ability, opportunity, and jeopardy, all three of those prongs have to be met for you to be able to articulate that what you did was reasonable. Because when you stand in front of a jury, it's all going to be based on the totality of the circumstances and what they believe. If they put themselves in your shoes, what would a reasonable person have done given what you faced? And if those three prongs of ability, opportunity, and jeopardy aren't in play and you use deadly force against someone, you're going to be in a bad way when it comes to talking to the police, when it comes to talking to a prosecutor, when it comes to standing in front of a jury of your peers and trying to explain why what you did was reasonable given the totality of the circumstances. So learn the black letter law. And I didn't come up with this three-prong test. The first place I saw it was in Masad Ayyub's book, Deadly Force. If you haven't read that book, you need to read that book. You can also read Andrew Branca's The Law of Self-Defense, which is now in paperback. You can check that out. You need to do more than just go and learn the black letter law word for word based on the PowerPoint slides at your licensing class or straight out of the Penal Code handbook. You need to understand really how to apply that in your daily life, and this three-prong test is a good starting point. That's your tip for this week. Thanks for tuning in.
Help support Armed Lutheran Radio by visiting patreon.com/Armed Lutheran and become a sponsor today. Up next, it's Mia's Motivations with Mia Anstine.
Hello. Well, I don't know about you all, but here in our area, we have been watching as our friends have been sending their daughters off to college. Aaron mentioned in last week's episode that it is a time when we won't be able to be with our youngsters who are now young adults as they head off to college, and they're going to have to take care of themselves, and we're going to have to trust that they will be okay. As he mentioned, sometimes we're able to arm them as they head off to school, but some schools don't even allow any weapons or means of defense. And in that case, what do we do? What do we arm them with? Today I want to talk to you about something that you can arm them with, and hopefully you already have if they're of college age. In that, I want to refer back to another podcast, I guess it was 4 episodes ago, where the levels of awareness were discussed, the colors of awareness, and the levels of alarm, white versus orange or red, and how alert you need to be. It was discussed how that's not really an accurate system, but what I want to share with you is something that you can arm your sons and daughters with. And I will primarily refer to daughters because I have a daughter, and we tend to hear more about women being attacked than men being attacked, but this does apply to boys as well. In that note, I want to let you know I'm not sponsored or paid or given anything for sharing this book that I'm about to tell you about. It's one that a friend of mine gave to me, and the only stipulation he said is that I needed to pass it along. So today, I want to share with you a book that you need to arm your son and daughters with. The book is called The Gift of Fear, and it's written by Gavin de Becker. It is exactly what the title says. It's giving them the gift of fear. And that may incite a reaction of, why would I want them to be afraid? I don't want them to be scared, but that's not what it's about. The gift of fear refers to us relying on our ultimate survival tool that God gave us, and that is our intuition. It is not necessarily the colors of awareness. It is intuition, which many of us are disconnected from, and it's our ultimate natural animal instinct. If you can think about how polite your parents taught you to be, how polite you're teaching your sons and daughters to be, sometimes that can be a danger because sometimes we're too worried about not hurting somebody's feelings when really it could mean our lives, it could mean our safety. If you can get that book and read it, listen to those stories and pay attention to intuition. There are times when it doesn't matter if you hurt somebody's feelings, if it means saving your well-being, your security, and ultimately your life. So remember to pay attention, listen to that intuition. Get reconnected with that and teach your sons and daughters to pay attention to their intuition as well as they head off in their life journeys and become young, independent adults.
This is Pastor Brian Wolfmueller of Table Talk Radio. Thank goodness you're listening to the Armed Lutheran Radio podcast.
Time now for another Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill Silvia.
This is Sergeant Bill with your Ballistic Minute. Today we're going to talk about shooting partials in IDPA. Partials are hard-covered or non-threat covered targets. Okay, now what you need to do is you need to identify what's available on these targets. In IDPA, your non-threat targets and your threat targets are both brown paper targets. So they look the same. From a distance, you might not be able to see the edge of that non-threat target that's over a threat target. A hard-covered target would be usually painted black where the hard cover is, simulating a wall or some sort of hard cover that the bullets, if it was a real-life scenario, would not penetrate through and hit your target. It can also be a wall or a barrel or anything that the target is partially hidden behind. Now, I think on a hardcover target, there's no penalties for if you hit the hard cover. It's just a miss. So because there's no additional penalty, I say go for a zero-down shot. If you're calling your shot, you'll know if you may have pulled one into the hardcover, and you can always put a makeup or an insurance shot on there. Never hurts to put a third shot on a two-shot target if you really need it. Now let me back up. On a non-threat target, partial or a hardcover, when I said you need to ID it, I mean you need to see what's available. You need to determine how much of that threat target you have available. So, general rule a lot of people will say is take your threat target that's available, divide it in half, and that middle line is where you're aiming. Now, like I said, on a hardcover target, there's no penalty for hitting the hardcover. So, I typically am not going to aim for the safe shot in the middle and center line of the available threat target, I'm going to go for what zero down shots that I can make. Now, if it's a non-threat and it's not hard cover, if you hit that non-threat target, you're going to incur a penalty for every shot. So the common wisdom of taking the available threat target that you can see and dividing it in half and aiming at the middle, i.e., or better called a safe shot, is what I would do on a non-threat, covered target. There's also the specialty targets, where they're a barrel or a prop or a wall or something is hiding part of your threat target. Now, those are kind of the same thing as a hardcover target. You're not going to get any penalties for hitting the prop, the barrel, but you're also not going to get your points on target. So, say you have a target that's leaned out behind a barrel, maybe you put 3 shots on it real quick, and then you move on to your next target. Really, it all boils down to distance. The closer to the target, the more aggressive you can be on where you're shooting on the available threat target. The further away it is, you're going to want to go for more a safe shot. That way you have a little bit more wiggle room with your accuracy so that you're not going to get penalties and points down for missing. Now, in the few years that I've been shooting, I've had this happen to me, and I see it all the time. Partial targets cause a lot of misses and a lot of anxiety in shooters. They get to a stage that isn't really that difficult to stage, but there's non-threats in front of the targets, and they get all freaked out like, oh man, I gotta go really slow and get my hits. Yes and no. Yes, you need to get your hits, but do you really need to go slow based on that distance? If they're close targets, you can still go pretty fast. You'd be amazed at how well you can shoot at close targets, whether there's a little bit of a danger, non-threat or hard cover or whatever it may be, but you don't know until you try it, until you push yourself. That's what club matches are for, right? That's what practice is for. You try this stuff out and see what happens. See what you can do. See what you're comfortable doing. So basically what I'm saying is, take the time you need. Give those non-threat or, partial targets the respect that they need and they deserve. But they usually have plenty of scoring area available for you to make your shots. And remember, you can always put up makeup shots or an insurance shot on a target that has a partial if you're worried about not getting the points that you need to get. This has been your Ballistic Minute with Sergeant Bill.
It's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. I'm Alan Gottlieb, founder of the Second Amendment Foundation. When someone says we don't need that kind of gun, remind them the Founding Fathers determined what rights our Constitution should protect. There's a world of difference between rights and needs. It is not the function of government to tell us what we need or what we don't. Certainly no one needs an assault rifle or a Saturday night special, or for that matter, no one needs a Corvette with a high-capacity horsepower engine capable of speeds to 150 miles per hour. But in the hands of honest, responsible individuals, we have the right of choice. We have the right to read books others don't like. We have the right to listen to any radio program we choose. We have the right to dress the way we want to. We also have the right to own firearms of our choice. So the next time someone tells you you don't need something, tell them it's the Bill of Rights, not the Bill of Needs. Join the Second Amendment Foundation today so that this message and our Bill of Rights might live. Call 425-454-7012. That's 425-454-7012.
Pistols, prayer, and potluck. This is Armed Lutheran Radio.
So this past week, a couple of Hollywood celebs came out and voiced their support for gun control. Both are ironic and moronic at the same time. The biggest one, the one I wanted to talk about today, is actor Chris Evans. Evans plays Captain America in the Marvel Avengers movies, and he tweeted his support for the Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healy and her unilateral, and some would say illegal, wholesale reinterpretation of state law. On August 15th, Evans tweeted, "Not anti-gun, but certain weapons should only be in certain hands. I support Massachusetts AG enforcement of the assault weapons ban. Hashtag stand with Maura." Well, as we all know, when somebody says, "I'm not anti-gun," or "I support the Second Amendment," and then they follow that statement with the word "but," everything they say before the "but" is nullified. See, what Miss Healy has decided, the law be damned, is that she's going to interpret it any way she wants and ban guns that she doesn't like. She's not enforcing the law, as Evans suggests. She's expanding it without having to go through the messy trouble of, having it amended by the legislature. At issue is what they call copycat assault rifles, whatever that really means. But apparently it's guns that have been manufactured in such a way as to make them Massachusetts compliant so that they're not subject to the Commonwealth's ignorant restrictions on guns that are based on features, which have nothing to do with the lethality or their use in crime. Healy decided that even guns manufactured to comply with the law are now going to be illegal, just because she says so. Now, did she go through the state legislature? No. She took a page right out of President Pants on Fire's playbook, and she used her pen and her phone, and she just made it happen by executive fiat. You see, this is the exact kind of thing that Captain America would have opposed. At least the old Captain America of the comics, and the Captain America apparently of the movies. Not the new liberal relativist Captain America from the comics of recent years, as I understand it. The true Captain America, the old Captain America, and the one depicted in the movies, is unfailingly moral and upstanding. Right is right, wrong is wrong. And while he is Captain America, America's government serves at the behest of the American people, not the other way around. The last Captain America movie is called Civil War, and I haven't seen it, I have to admit. I don't go to the movies. Not very often. Very rarely. Maybe once a year, if that. I'm trying to think the last movie I went to see. I don't even remember. If it's on Netflix or if I can rent it streaming, I will. If it's good enough, I may buy it. Brandon Warr at Warzone Media at his podcast does a great review of it. Check it out. I'll put a link to it in the show notes. Anyway, the movie's based on a storyline from the comics. The storyline was published in 2006, and it has some really eerie parallels to the gun rights debate. The government in this story doesn't like the good guys, doesn't trust them. Following a series of violent and deadly events involving superhumans, the government and many in the public demand greater accountability, so they pass this law that requires all superheroes to register. Sound familiar? All right, get this. I did not know this. I looked some of this up. Apparently, the public in this storyline turns against the supers, if I'm going to use a term from the movie The Incredibles, after an incident in, of all places, Connecticut, where, you guessed it, an elementary school full of kids gets blown up. That really sounds familiar, right? Okay, so the act that is passed by Congress and signed into law requires that any person with superhuman powers register with the government, that they reveal their identity, and that they undergo training. Again, does any of this sound familiar? Well, it should, because it's the gun debate in colorful spandex, written 6 years before the massacre at Newtown. Mark Millar, or Miller, my apologies. Again, I'm Southern. I mispronounce things. It's what I do. Who wrote the series, may not have intended this to be a parallel to the gun debate, but it is. That's the way it turned out. What do we hear? We talk about good guys with guns, and the anti-gun crowd doesn't trust us. They fear us. In the comics, they didn't want an outright ban of superheroes. They just wanted to regulate and control them. Today's anti-gun politicians will come out and say, oh, no, we're not talking about banning guns, but we do want to regulate and control them. The government and the public want to know who the superhumans, the superheroes are. In the real world, anti-gun zealots and politicians and media types want to out gun owners by making the names of concealed carry permit holders public. The heroes in the comic, and I take it in the movie as well, they're divided on the issue. Captain America is decidedly against it and considers it an overreach of government power. Tony Stark, as Iron Man, whose father built the family fortune building weapons systems for the government, oddly enough, is in favor and thinks that resisting the law is futile. One side sees registration as responsible. The other side sees it as a violation of civil liberties. I always loved Captain America. He and Batman were my favorite superheroes as a kid. There was just something about, there's a right and a wrong. Everything was black and white. There was no gray. Why does this story matter? Why does it matter that Chris Evans did this? I mean, after all, Chris Evans isn't Captain America. Why this matters to me is that the image of Captain America is being co-opted to push an anti-liberty executive gun control. It's something that the fictional Captain America would hate, including the Captain America portrayed by Evans in the movies. Healy retweeted Evans's tweet and thanked him for his support and replied with her own hashtag, Stand with Cap, with a nice little American flag next to it. I'm sorry, Miss Healy. Chris Evans is not Cap. You're not standing with Cap. You're standing with Chris. Chris is just a Hollywood tool who makes a living pretending to be other people. He's as much a hero as I am. There's a line of dialogue from the comics, which may or may not have made its way into the movie. Again, I didn't watch it. I don't know. It's a good one. It originally appeared in Amazing Spider-Man 537, and it goes like this. This is Captain America. It doesn't matter what the press says. It doesn't matter what the politicians or the mobs say. It doesn't matter if the whole country decides that something wrong is something right. This nation was founded on one principle above all else, the requirement that we stand up for what we believe, no matter the odds or the consequences. When the mob and the press and the whole world tell you to move, your job is to plant yourself like a tree beside the river of truth and tell the whole world, no, you move. The river of truth is on our side. Using loaded and meaningless terms like assault weapons or assault rifles shows you just which side of the river those two, Evans and Healy, are on. The mob and the press will tell us to move, to compromise, to meet them halfway, to give up our rights so that they feel safe. Chris Evans and Maura Healy support the idea that a government bureaucrat can unilaterally ban products which are legal based on the laws voted on and passed by the state's elected leaders, just with the stroke of her pen. I don't know about you, but that doesn't sound much like the kind of thing that Captain America would stand behind. Well, that's, of course, he's working for Hydra. Could be that. Come to think of it, Healy does bear a striking resemblance to Red Skull. I'm just saying.
So you have your concealed carry permit or license to carry. Now what? Now you need a good holster. Not one of those cheap neoprene prophylactic holsters you can buy in the big box stores. You need a holster custom built for the firearm you intend to carry every day. Check out cooksholsters.com. Made in the USA, Cooks holsters are available in a wide range of colors and designs for inside the waistband or outside waistband carry. They carry a lifetime warranty against defects and a 100% satisfaction guaranteed. Visit www.cooksholsters.com and use the promo code ARMEDPODCAST and take 15% off everything in the store. You put in the time and effort to legally carry a firearm for personal protection. Protect your firearm with a custom holster from cooksholsters.com.
You're listening to Armed Lutheran Radio, a member of the Self-Defense Radio Network.
Welcome back. Joining me now to discuss this whole Stand with Cap controversy is Brandon Warr, host of Warzone Media. Brandon, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on. I'm excited to be here.
Well, you describe Warzone Media as bringing Concordia to pop culture. There's other shows out there that do this sort of thing, Issues, Etc., and Virtue in the Wasteland. They talk pop culture from time to time. But what I like about your show is it's more accessible. It's not to insult the other guys. It's not as highbrow, if you know what I mean. It's sort of the layman talking about pop culture in light of the gospel. I like that. What motivated you to start the podcast and to start doing this?
Well, as you said, there's a lot of shows out there that talk about pop culture, and I love all those shows, Issues, Etc., and all the others, and even 1517, they've got a couple of podcasts out talking about pop culture. But the way I come at it is from a layman's perspective. So I got kind of the idea of the show way back in 2012, just as a young layman, just got married, and just talking to other laymen in my church and just trying to make sense of the world we live in. And I was just becoming a Lutheran as well, so I was also learning about vocation. And so I thought this is a great way for laymen to look at culture, look at whether it's the entertainment we consume, politics, whatever in the culture, look at it from first off the theology of the cross, and also our vocation as laymen living under the rule and reign of Christ. So
very good. Well, I really enjoy it, and I was struck. I was listening to, I think it was Virtue in the Wasteland the other day. They were talking about the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the movies, and they had never seen them before, and they were trying to describe them, and it was so painful. And I thought Brandon would have no trouble with this, and it was really funny to listen. The difference was it was sort of comical, but we talked about doing an interview, and then this thing with Chris Evans pops up, and I was recording my monologue on the subject and the whole Stand with Cap hashtag, and I even mentioned your review of the Civil War movie.
Right.
And then I even went back and listened to your review again, and it dawned on me that this would be the perfect time to bring you onto the show as sort of the pop culture go-to guy. And so I appreciate you taking the time. All right, I've given everybody the rundown on what happened with Chris Evans and Maura Healy, the AG from Massachusetts. So I know Chris Evans, he's not Captain America. I get that. I'm not geeking out here, but you said in your review that your first comic book was Captain America. He and Batman were my faves as a kid. So give us sort of the lowdown on who this Captain America guy, if somebody listening is like the guys that I was listening to trying to understand Lord of the Rings, if they don't understand Captain America or they haven't seen the movies, like I have not seen the most recent one, give us a lowdown on who Steve Rogers and the Captain America character of the comic books is.
Well, the Captain America, the character, started as a creation of Joe Simon and Jack Kirby, who were Jewish immigrants to America. They were fleeing from what they saw was going on during that time, during the World War II era. And America had not yet been involved in the war, and at the time that Captain America came out. And so they decided to do the craziest thing, which is have the comic book cover of Captain America punching Adolf Hitler in the face, and made it very clear who they were going to align with if America got into the war. And of course, shortly after that, we had Pearl Harbor, and we were thrust into the war. And the storyline for Captain America was basically him fighting in World War II against the Nazis and the Japanese. That's pretty much the entire run. After the war was over, Captain America was kind of put to the wayside as a character, and then he was resurrected, so to speak, in a storyline that Stan Lee wrote in the 60s, where he was frozen in ice and he was thawed out. He was brought into this new era of rebellion and recklessness, and the 60s had failed miserably. And Captain America is looking at this and saying, this wasn't the ideal America that I fought for.
Right.
It's now become a huge debacle, and it was the story was basically Captain America dealing with the ideas of America, things like personal liberty, things like equality, and how those two actually were either going to destroy each other or actually going to answer each other. He's always been about personal liberty. He's always been a very if we do the right thing as Americans, if we stand up for our rights, our fundamental human rights that are given to us in the Constitution, then we're going to be okay. Now, Captain America, a lot of times was in the comics a very one-dimensional character, simply because a lot of people didn't know how to deal with this type of Americana type of character.
Right.
Until the early 2000s, when the Civil War storyline in the comics happened. And it gave a perfect opportunity for the writers of the comics to actually ask the question, well, in how much personal liberty would Captain America be willing to give up in exchange for, say, his safety? And the answer was none. He wasn't willing to give up any of them, to the point to where in the comics he actually is, I'm going to get a little bit nerdy, but he's taken to the negative zone, which was used as a prison for the superheroes that did not yield to the Superhero Registration Act in the comics. So he's been very personal liberty minded. If you think about a very almost a libertarian-esque superhero, that's who Captain America is.
Gotcha.
Now, recently, there's been a shift in the comics in that Captain America has started to parrot the talking points of the more fringe left. And a lot of comic book fans have seen that and have not been responding very well to it. There's a new Captain America storyline going on right now, and I'm not going to get into the details of it, but it's basically just saying, his whole worldview was a Nazi this whole time. His whole mindset, he was a part of Hydra, which was the secret Nazi organization that he fought in World War II. So I don't know where they're going with that. I hope that maybe it's a false flag and they're going to fix it at the end of the storyline. But right now, it's painful for someone like me to read the Captain America comics because it's almost parroting, and even his arch enemy, the Red Skull, the writers are starting to use Donald Trump speeches to write the dialogue for Red Skull. So it's a confusion of the character. It's a confusion of everything the character stood for. But the entire comic book industry has shifted to a very social justice warrior type of mentality.
Liberalism corrupts everything.
Exactly, yeah. It's not even fun to read them anymore, to be honest with you, but I try to make it through. It.
So what's the character like? How do they portray him in the movie? Is it the more modern Captain America, or is it the old tried and true black and white Captain America?
Thankfully, it's the tried and true. Now, the first Captain America movie was directed by a different guy, Joe Johnston. The latter two, which is Winter Soldier and Civil War, which is just recently came out, were directed by two brothers, Joe and Anthony Russo. And while they haven't came out and said whether they're conservative or libertarian, conservatarian, if you listen to the audio commentary, especially for Winter Soldier, they talk about a lot that their political views, and they're definitely not left, so their political views have influenced how they write the character and how they write the stories. And the overall theme, I think, for both the Winter Soldier and Civil War has been fear of big government. If you look at, that's the thread running through both movies, and Captain America has really stayed true to his roots in the movies, which is ironic, the direction that the comic book industry is going. But that's why a lot of fans are gravitating more toward the movies now, because this is the Captain America that I personally grew up with. This is the Captain America that I knew as a kid and wanted to be like as a kid.
Right.
So to have Joe and the Russo brothers direct the movies and help write the movies has really kept Captain America focused as a character on what he should be, which is personal freedom, personal liberty, a very individualistic instead of a collectivist type of character.
Gotcha. Now, like I said in my commentary, I haven't seen the latest movie. I've seen the first two. Haven't seen Civil War. I haven't read Captain America probably since the 90s. I'm familiar with the storyline indirectly. It's one that played out in other books and movies, Batman versus Superman, The Watchmen, for example. If you want to hear Brandon's review, I recommend it. It's excellent. Link to it in the show notes. Give us a Cliff's Note version of what Civil War is all about and why Captain America chooses the side that he does in that Civil War.
So the Civil War film is basically, it starts out with a reaction to the Avengers. And if you haven't seen Winter Soldier, the organization that kind of ran the Avengers Initiative has collapsed, that being S.H.I.E.L.D., and they're kind of free agents now. The UN does not like that. It doesn't like it at all, especially seeing as how they can incur a lot more damage than a normal person would going into a dangerous situation. So they draw up a document called the Sokovia Accords, which is a fictional country in the film, and that's been affected by the Avengers. And basically, it's a registration to have the UN say when the Avengers are going to go in and when they're going to execute justice and do the right thing, or when they're going to stand down. They'll become soldiers for the UN as opposed to the free agents that they are as the movie starts. And you have two sides of the debate. You have Tony Stark, who's Iron Man, who falls on the, yes, we need this intervention. We can't be trusted with our own responsibilities. And then you have Captain America, of course, the very black and white, old line personal liberty Captain America, who says, no, we take responsibility for our actions. And he even has a speech towards the beginning of the movie where he says, if they say we can't go and save these people and we let them die, that's on us. If they say we need to go somewhere, but it's a part of their agenda, then that's also on us. So we have the responsibility to protect people, to protect life, but also to have responsibility when things go wrong. And no one should come in just because things could potentially go wrong and say that we're going to take away your freedom to act and to do what's right. We're going to take that away, and basically you're going to be who we say that you are. And that's really the head conflict in Civil War. You have these two opposing sides. One says more regulation, less freedom. The other says more freedom and more responsibility, so that we don't have to bow to other people's whims.
And that's where I see the interesting and kind of creepy parallels to the gun debate. Like I said, earlier, I know this is Chris Evans' opinion. He's not Captain America. This is not Captain America's opinion.
Right.
My objection is, and what sticks in my craw a little bit is, like you, Captain America is one of my favorite heroes from my childhood. What sticks in my craw is the idea that they're using this image of Captain America to push big government and laws that restrict personal liberty, and the idea that some unelected or some bureaucrat, I don't know whether she was elected or not, she's the attorney general, could just decide how the law is going to be enforced without input from the people or their representatives. And reading through, trying to understand the nuances of the comic Civil War storyline, I found really interesting parallels to the gun rights debate. This talk about the idea that we can't trust the good guys with their powers, and we often hear in the gun rights debate the talk about a good guy with a gun. Well, you can't really trust them with the responsibility of being able to own a firearm or carry a firearm. The need for registration and training. Part of the Registration Act in the comic was not only would they would have to register, they would have to reveal their identity, something that we've seen, liberals want to do with gun owners and out them in the newspapers and make public the lists of concealed carry permit holders' names and addresses. Mm-hmm. And the idea of training, that the superheroes would have to be properly trained, is parallels to the call that from liberals that gun owners have to get training before they should be allowed to have a gun.
Right.
The Sokovia thing, which doesn't happen in the comics, the real driver. I found this really, really interesting. The driver that pushes the Civil War thing over the edge is the destruction of an elementary school in Connecticut, and this was 6 years before Newtown.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I should say the comic book story is not an exact adaptation into the film, but yeah, you're right. The comic book story happens from a supervillain using his power to show up some new superheroes that are just new. They're new to the superhero thing. They're getting their start, and this supervillain uses his power to basically incinerate this elementary school, and that's what sparks this whole debate in the comics. And it was one of those things that even in the comics it had some media, they portrayed the media as being very biased, because it would all, you had Captain America talking about how this was a supervillain. Supervillains are going to do villainy things. I mean, it kind of in the idea of a supervillain, but the idea that it was the fault of the new heroes, and that was what the media kept pushing in the first few issues of the comic. It was the new heroes. The new heroes were reckless. They were careless, and they didn't know what they were doing.
And there's another parallel to the gun debate. You hear we're always blaming the gun, and we're always trying to restrict the freedoms of gun owners instead of focusing on the criminals. In the comic book, the villains, you're focusing on the good guys. Exactly,
and it weaves into Captain America's character more of the idea of personal responsibility. In that he understands that he isn't unsympathetic, and a lot of times people want to paint us gun owners as unsympathetic to tragedies like Newtown and things like that. But it's not that the character of Captain America is not unsympathetic, but he understands that there's going to be, to borrow a line from Spider-Man, with great power comes great responsibility. And you're going to, when the power is taken away from those that would do good, or that would, in Lutheran terms, and what Scripture says, love our neighbor as ourselves. When you take that away, the freedom to do that away from good guys, it only leaves the villains, those who would do those tragedies with all the rights. And that's another big parallel I see in the storyline as well.
All right. So to sort of bring this thing to bring it full circle and finish things out, what do you think about this whole kerfuffle with the Stand With Cap hashtag being used the way it's been?
Well, it kind of mirrors a few months ago. There was also a unfortunate hashtag that a lot of people decided to put on Twitter. It was "Give Captain America a Boyfriend," and it was it was humorous at first, and then people really pushed it. People started realizing, okay, this is not, you shouldn't be pushing that on a character that's been around for 75 years, obviously.
Right.
And I think that from what I'm seeing of the Stand With Cap hashtag, a lot of people are calling that one out too as being, look, you're equating an actor's opinion, and he's entitled to have his wrong opinion if he wants, but
sure.
You're equating his opinion with the character himself. And luckily, Chris Evans, is not writing or directing anything Captain America. He's taking the direction. So, yeah, I have, listening to what he says, I have a theory that most Hollywood actors aren't as big into these issues as we would think from their words. I think they hear certain things, or their managers tell them certain things, and they kind of parrot what they hear, the talking points.
They're low information.
Yeah. And I don't want to say Chris Evans is uninformed on this issue, but I see what he's saying, and a lot of that has that feel of he's just parroting because this is the industry he's in. This is what he's going to say. He'll go back to talking about, the movie, in a little bit, but first he has to tweet out that he's proud of the sit-in that the Democrats did for gun control, so that his status is still there.
Right.
So to equate the two is not a good idea, and it's a typical social justice warrior tactic where they will take something completely out of context, use it for their own political agenda, and then just run with it, co-opting, which is funny because they don't like cultural appropriation, but yet they'll appropriate everything that we like to fit their agenda. So,
yep, absolutely true. All right. Well, Brandon Warr is the host of Warzone Media, the podcast, and you're on YouTube as well now. I see your Warzone.com takes you to, it is Warzone.com, right?
WarzoneMedia.com.
WarzoneMedia.com. It takes you straight to your YouTube channel. So you've got the podcast. It's on Pirate Christian Radio. You've got a series of videos. I will link to both of those in the show notes. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on the show today, and continued success with everything you do.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. Thank you. And that's going to do it for today's episode. Thank you to our contributors, Aaron Israel of Fundamental Defense, Mia Anstine, and of course Bill Silvia for their contributions, and to our special guest, Brandon Warr of Warzone Media, for joining me today. And don't forget to check out this week's midweek meditation for my interview with Paul Lathrop of the Polite Society podcast. That's coming this Thursday. And thank you, dear listener, for listening, downloading, and subscribing. If you like what you heard, be sure to check out the website, visit the feedback page, send us an email, leave us a voice message, and we'd love to hear from you. We'd love to respond to your message on the air in a future episode. Until next week, remember, keep shooting, keep praying. We'll talk to you next time.
For show notes, be sure to visit our website, at www.armedlutheran.us. Follow us on Twitter at Armed Lutheran. Check out the Facebook page at facebook.com/thearmedlutheran. If you like what you hear, please leave us a review on iTunes and let us know what you think. Thank you for listening to Armed Lutheran Radio.